All right. All right. Give me one moment.
First day of meteorological summer.
Right.
And
Okay.
this is different from,
Astronomical. Meteorological versus astronomical.
yeah, but how is this different? I mean, why?
It's just that they divided the world the year in quarters, just to make it simple.
Okay. I'm just not gonna go there.
No, it makes sense. There's 12 months. They divided the 12 by 4, and they have 3-month seasons. So they run June to July, August. September, I mean. And then
Wait a minute. January, February, March is 3 months. April, May, and all of June.
no, today's the first day of, I don't know when they start, but June 1st is the first day of meteorological.
Meteorological.
In that case, meteorological winter begins December 1st, December,
Correct.
January, February, March,
Yes.
April, May,
It
June,
just makes
July,
it
August.
just makes it easier and neater. Plus, it's the start of hurricane
Not for
season.
me. Forget I ever heard you.
Well, see,
Yeah, if you want to be simple about it, right?
I
Well,
prefer the year as it was first presented to me.
but if you can keep track of the Jewish New Year, you should be able to do this.
I keep
This is a
track of
lot
the
easier.
New Year on a calendar which is published by Goyim.
Yeah. All right. So I decided.
They've not only caught up with us, they've caught up with the Muslims and I think the Hindus.
So
Does the rabbi speak?
hello.
Yep.
Everybody, let's mute.
Yeah. Is that? People are still coming on, so we'll give people just a second. So at 1822, is that Judy?
No, that's me.
Oh, it's you. Oh, hi, Elaine. How are you? Great.
Hi, I'm all right.
Good. Nice to hear your voice.
Thank you.
All right. And all right. And then, and who just joined us at 5904?
Hi, Rabbi Jim. It's Mary Gillette.
Hi, Mary. Nice to hear your voice.
You too.
All right. I'm going to put your name up on the screen so that you're Mary and not just a number. All right.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Mary.
Hi,
Hi,
Elaine.
Mary.
And
Hi.
Richard.
Hello.
it looks like we lost somebody.
Hello, everybody. Yeah.
So I don't know what happened. But I don't know. I can't keep track of these things. All right. So good. Well, I was just going to say that I chose this topic last week. And I'm very excited to learn about this with you. But I did just want to, make a mention of what's going on in the life of our country. And if I were doing Soul Search the way that I used to do it, which meant that I would wake up the morning of the session and scan the newspaper, scan various blogs, this, that, and the other thing, and decide. I probably would have made a different choice for today, but I'm sticking with what we've got because I do think it's a worthwhile topic, and this will also give me more time to, hopefully it'll give the country time to calm down a bit, and hopefully cooler heads will prevail, and there'll be less violence, and we can sort of get ourselves to the work of trying to figure out how to make our country work for everybody. But it's a sobering moment in our nation's history for any number of reasons. But this weekend was a tough one. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, and we can obviously we can talk about those issues next week if if that makes sense. But we'll figure out about that. Feel free to be in touch with me if you have ideas, things that you'd like to have discussed. Obviously, I can't promise, but I can certainly promise to consider them. So, all right. So let's get going. I have to call up the article in question on this computer. Hold on one second. Huh. I apologize. It's taking me a few more moments than I anticipated for it to pop up. It's very frustrating. All right. All right, there we go. I apologize for that taking such a long time. And then I want to go down here to, we have two more people on the phone. So who is at 0376? Hello? Okay. And how about 8419?
Oh, that's me,
And who's me?
Vivian.
Vivian. Hi, Vivian.
Hi, Rabbi. I just got in. Did it just start?
Yeah, we're just starting up now. And then I'm going to try one more time for 0376. Okay, that's fine. It's fine. All right, so everyone who has a screen, I hope, can see what I put up. And please feel free to raise your hand. If you're on the telephone, you raise your hand by pushing *9, I believe it is, to raise a virtual hand. If I miss it somehow, then just let me know, and I will. You can come off mute and say, interrupt me. I'm very happy to be interrupted. Okay. So this is called "I Believed That I Would See Her Again," and if you have the screen, you can see a picture of Karen Teal, I believe is her name, Catholic theologian, who talks about her own mother's death and how that affirmed her faith and belief in the afterlife, which is a very interesting sort of. I don't know what I would say. To me, right, as someone who's not so sure about these things, it's very interesting for me to try to get into the perspective of someone who has obviously a different belief structure. Okay, so this is by George Yancey. He's a philosopher at Emory University, and He is having a series of conversations, as he says here, exploring religion and death. And this is with Karen Thiel, who has been a member of the Department of Theology and Religious Studies at the University of San Diego since 2007. Her research and teaching focus on the essential beliefs of Christianity and the theological engagement with the problems of racism and white supremacy. She is the author of Racism and the Image of God, which is a very interesting title. I don't know anything about it. All right. So George Yancey begins with a personal question. What does it mean for you, he asks, to embody the teachings of Roman Catholicism? Karen Thiel says, I grew up Catholic and I continue to practice Catholicism not out of obligation because I claim it as my home. I try to live faithfully by what is highest and best in my church. This actually means that my allegiance is not first and foremost to the Roman Catholic Church, is not first and foremost to the Roman Catholic Church, a human and imperfect institution, but to Jesus and his God and to his God of love and justice. So for me, embodying the teachings of my church means trying to love deeply, to live with integrity, to treat every person as beloved by God, and therefore to work passionately for justice in the world. One way that I have chosen to demonstrate fidelity to my church is by raising my children Catholic. I want them to know in their bones what it means to belong to a faith community, so that when they grow up, that is a real option for them. Embodying the teaching of Catholicism means living the truth that I believe, and really believing that this is the truth, while respecting and honoring the fact that others also live according to what they believe is true. So I think there's several interesting things in this introduction, and I'll just name one of them, I think, and then I'll ask for a show of hands if there's anything that strikes any of you about her opening paragraph. But what I really focused in on at first, right, is that this is her home, right? This is her spiritual home, and that there is sort of a sense that not just that she's comfortable there, right, but that it is that there's going to be things about it, right, that are not perfect, and that her allegiance really is to the ideal of that church, right, rather than to necessarily its earthly trappings at this point, which I think is really, really interesting, because I do think that sometimes we have a sense about people often have a sense about religion as being a kind of an all or nothing kind of a proposition. If there's something wrong, then obviously we need to jettison it, right? And it's and I think it's not just people who are not religious that are that way, right? There's a tendency towards black and white thinking when we talk about religion, and so I really like this imagery of home. All right, so but any other thoughts? Please feel free. Yeah, the person at 0376 unmuted. Did you want to say something? Okay, I'll take silence as a no. All right, good. So I will continue.
Oh, okay.
Oh, go ahead. Barbara, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I did. As what I call myself now a non-practicing Christian. However, I have to agree with her I'll talk about my own church, the Episcopal Church, that would be my belief too, is that the institution is not certainly far from perfect, but that trying to live in those ways, those teachings of the church, for me is the way to live. And even though I'm a non-practicing Christian, I do try to live that way.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because religion or not, I think it's just the best way for people to live and behave with all those ideals.
Right. I mean, right. What she says, right, is that, is to love deeply, right, to live with integrity and treat every person as beloved by God, right? It's hard not to get behind statements like that, right?
True. And I think those, from what I can tell, those are also Jewish teachings.
100%, right? And I think they're also, among the Muslims that I know, it's also very much the way that that they talk about their faith. So this does have a very sort of Abrahamic twinge to it, right? I'm on much less solid ground when it comes to traditions outside. So I don't want to make any claims sort of for the universality, so to speak, of this. But it certainly is, they certainly are nice ways of thinking about it. Go ahead. So Naomi and then Barbara.
Sorry.
No, go on. I guess I'm trying to still, although I did the same thing myself with Judaism, distinguish between attendance at the institution, because I'm sure she goes to mass on a regular basis.
Yeah.
The institutional behavior, and on the other hand, the allegiance to the principles of love and justice.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I do the same thing myself in Judaism, but at least I have an institution that goes the same way I go.
Right. I think right, and that's a very interesting. That's a very interesting point, right? Because that's one of the biggest distinctions between Judaism and Catholicism, right? Is that Judaism is a radically decentralized system, right? Each synagogue, and this has become increasingly the case as the movements in Judaism become less relevant to congregational life, that each congregation sort of makes up its own way of going. Whereas in the Catholic Church, right, there's a pope, and everyone is supposed to be beholden to the Pope, and there's supposed to be more consistency. Now, of course, different parishes are going to have different priorities, and they're going to have different leadership, and so obviously there's going to be differences among churches. But the sort of monolithic notion, it's a much more capacious place, and not just because of the size of the cathedrals. But it is an interesting distinction. But we certainly in Judaism, right, we certainly have our folks who would define all of those terms, right? Loving deeply, living with integrity, and treating every person as beloved by God, right? That they would interpret those much differently than say I would. So, but yeah, now go ahead, Barbara.
No, I'm done.
No, I'm sorry, different Barbara. Barbara Goldwasser.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I realized too late that we have two Barbaras. All right, so Barbara, I'm trying to unmute you, but
I just did. Did I just unmute me?
Yep, very good. There you are. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. I was thinking it's about living a good life. And it's not only in Christianity and Judaism, but in Eastern religions as well. but how one conceives of a good life is whether it's individualistic or whether it's more plural, where you decide that other people should live the life that you consider to be good, and it should be more your way or whatever your tenets' ways are. Or that's, I didn't use that right, but the tenets of your religion are, and whether you're going to enforce it, unfortunately.
Right. I'm reading a book now that I forget who suggested it to me. So if it was one of you, please remind me. It's called The Weight of Ink, and it's about 17th century Jews in London, and the way that the community tried to regulate itself, and to put certain strictures on its members that were very difficult to enforce, but also very difficult to live under the strictures. So it's there is always this tension, right, between that Barbara mentions, right, between and this is the second part of her little introduction here, right, that she can respect and honor the fact that others live according to what they believe is true, right, and that kind of commitment to pluralism has been very often lacking in the world of religion, right, and this is one of the major problems that we encounter in clashes between religious people and non-religious people, or between religious people of different faiths, right, is that we have this sort of idea sometimes that we are right, and that must mean that the other person is wrong. So that there's nothing like having a strong interfaith clergy association to realize that you definitely don't have everything right yourself. So it's good to meet with my non-Jewish colleagues.
I'd like to say something.
Please.
I started life very religious. I had a grandmother who was almost saintly, and I was 7 when she died. And let's say I'm very well educated Jewishly. And that's not true for many women my age. What can one say at this particular point in life? My youngest daughter is having some physical difficulties, and Marvin's son as well. And I've been going to services to say a Mishabera. It's not going to hurt. I don't. Absolutely not.
Well, it definitely will not hurt.
That's about it.
Yeah, exactly.
When you see what goes on in the Catholic hierarchy and in the Jewish hierarchy, of course there is one. It's very distressing. Mm-hmm. So am I indeed a religious Jew? I always identify as Jewish, no question. But I don't believe in a lot of this stuff.
All right, well, thank you. Good. So we will continue here. Okay, so Yancey asks, what do you consider some of the essential teachings of Roman Catholicism? Roman Catholics share the basic beliefs that all Christians have in common. We believe that God is a Trinity, one God in 3 persons. We proclaim that Jesus saves, and we use the Bible, both Hebrew and Christian scriptures, as our sacred text. For me, the most important distinctively Catholic belief is the Eucharist. My church teaches that when we celebrate communion, Jesus becomes present in the bread and wine that we share. The way the people come together every week to be nourished by this concrete reminder of God's presence with us in the struggle is really beautiful. Okay, so I don't think we'll necessarily need to spend that much time on this, because this is sort of the but I like this explanation of the Eucharist, right? Not a simple transmogrification, right? But or transubstantiation. I'm not even sure if I know what the word is, right? But it's a concrete symbol of God's presence in among the people, which I think is quite beautiful. Okay, so we are concentrating in these discussions, says Yancey, on learning about and understanding religious conceptions of death. How is the reality of death conceptualized in your faith? Death is conceptualized as a transition from this life into eternal life. Christianity teaches that God is eternal, this world came from God, and will eventually return to God. In that sense, this life is temporary. Moreover, God created humans with immortal souls, so the death of a human being is not the end. The body dies while the soul continues to live. And if you have the screen, you see another picture of Karen Teal through a window, which seems to be symbolic. When this world comes to an end, Christianity teaches, Jesus, who has already been raised from the dead, will return to oversee the general resurrection of the dead and the last judgment. The bodies of those who have died will be resurrected, rendered alive anew in a glorious immortal state, and reunited with our souls. The bodies of those who have not yet died also will be transformed into this new state. And Jesus will separate us into two groups, those who will be eternally rewarded and those who will be punished. Christians traditionally believe that heaven is where God is and hell is where God is not. But I like the idea suggested in the teaching of one of my graduate school professors, Father Michael Himes, that we may all have the same destiny, to spend eternity being loved by God. For those who want God's love, this will be heaven. For those who don't, it will be hell. Which I found very interesting. All right, let me see. I think we can stop on this for a minute, but let's finish this last paragraph of this response. For Christians, everything that God created is good, and God will not allow anything that is good to pass away. We are never alone in this life or in eternity. The death of a loved one brings profound sadness, but it is a temporary separation. We hope and believe that we will see each other again. Death is not a separation from God, but a return to God. When a Christian dies, we say that they have gone to be with God, and that when we die, we will join. All right, so reactions, responses, questions. I see Naomi is shaking her head. Doesn't make any sense to you.
I just, yeah, I cannot incorporate that into my thinking.
Yeah.
Just cannot incorporate it. And
Yeah.
I have often jokingly said that after I die, if I see certain people coming towards me to welcome me into heaven, I am going to turn around and come back. Because I don't want to spend eternity with these people.
Right. Yeah, it's really, I love that. I mean, and it is very interesting, right? That when people who and it's not just Christians, obviously, a whole range of people believe that they will be reunited with loved ones when they die. It's an idea with a lot of tentacles, right? Many people have this idea and find it very comforting. But what is interesting is that they rarely talk the way you do, Naomi, about the people they don't want to see when they get there. Go ahead, Barbara. Barbara Baird.
My question,
Okay,
the word,
and then Barbara Baird.
okay, I noticed something. We are never alone.
Yeah.
Was something. Then the question to me was, well, who are you with? And does this mean that there's a divide? So it's nice if you want to be, but there are times when people need to be alone. Right. So I don't know where this is going. Right. I guess I read the article, by the way.
Oh yeah. I mean, I there's a very famous psalm that talks about sort of.
That's my.
Okay. There's a very famous psalm that I won't be able to find off the top of my head, But it basically is about what Barbara is saying, right? That there's no escaping from God, even if you want to, right? And so that actually does make a little bit of sense in terms of Father Michael Hymes's idea, right? That can be left alone, and this doesn't make it easy. All right, Barbara Baird, and then Richard.
I have to agree with Naomi. I have a terrible time trying to believe in the whole afterlife thing, and I try, but it just doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
What it leads me to believe is that in that case, we had better live the very best life we can while we're on Earth here.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and that is, I think, traditionally, sort of considered a Jewish way of looking at death, right? It's a teach us to number our days kind of teaching, right? That we want to take full advantage of the life that we've been given and not hurry ourselves out of here. But of course, again, I don't think that is in any way incompatible with an understanding of the afterlife. But it's sometimes both can be true for people. But the other thing that is really interesting here, right, is that she has to, right, as a believing Catholic and as a theology professor, right, she has to figure out what to do with the idea of hell, right? That there will be some people who will be punished for their earthly what they did in this earth, in this life. And again, there's plenty of evidence for that in Jewish thought, plenty of evidence for that in Islamic thought as well. So yeah. All right, go ahead, Richard.
Thank you. A couple of things. First of all, Naomi must have read Sartre, No Exit, Hell is Other People. The other thing is in the Catholic Church, they celebrate the funeral mass. The funeral mass is a celebration, which is an interesting concept. I'm retired from that, by the way. And I was going to say something else. Oh, and I'm under the impression that one of the tenets of Judaism is that as long as you remember the person who's died, he will continue to have basically live forever, not in a general sense. That's what I understand it. I'm obviously not necessarily right.
Yeah. Go ahead, Naomi.
Okay, Richard, one of the things that you do in Judaism is to name a child after someone who has died. And the worst thing that can happen to you is that your name would die out. So that's one of the ways it goes.
Yeah, I mean, it is very.
His name die out is a curse.
Right, I've heard that. I'm sorry I didn't say that, but yes, I understand that that's part of the deal.
Great. All right, so we will continue. This all seems to work out well for faithful Christians, but what about atheists? Should they fear death? No more than anyone else, says Thiel. In the 1960s, the Catholic Church's teaching non-Christian religions developed beyond the ancient notion that only Christians could be saved. Now the Church teaches that under certain conditions, people who do not identify as Christians may be saved. Personally, I believe that whenever a person does their best to live rightly, according to the principles that they know to be true, God honors that effort. Nothing good will be lost. So that's a very interesting shift. I'm talking, but it's a very interesting shift that she's describing, right? And it's part of this move towards pluralism that sort of has taken over in the last 50, 60 years. And we see it, with the rise of respect for other traditions in a lot of our different faiths. So speaking of atheism, I read recently that cosmologist Stephen Hawking said, I regard the brain as a computer which will stop working when its components fail. He also added, there is no heaven or afterlife for broken down computers. That is a fairy tale for people afraid of the dark. How do you respond to the charge that Christians who believe in an afterlife are just really afraid of the dark? That is, afraid of facing the inevitability of nothingness. All right, so this obviously this is, you know, we don't necessarily need Stephen Hawking, right, to pull out this argument and this challenge, right? It's a fairly common one, you know, that it's just, you know, the consolations of religion are just wish fulfillment and delusion, right? All right, so that's very logical. She says, I can see why a non-believer might think that. The question here is whether we are going to allow people to be the authorities on what they feel. When my mother was 59, and I just want to point that out, right? That's a very interesting, it's a very interesting take, right? That, and it's a very, I would say, it rings true with the way I at least attempt to behave in relationship with, you know, in my pastoral relationships or caregiving, you know, spiritual caregiving relationships, right? That what I believe, how am I an authority on the other person's spiritual life? You know, on the contrary, they are the ones who know what's important. So what she continues with the story. When my mother was 59, she was diagnosed with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. Hawking had it too. There's no cure for ALS. It's a neurological disease in which the mind usually remains sharp, but the voluntary muscles gradually stop working, leaving you totally dependent on others. Hawking lived for decades after his diagnosis. Most people live 2 to 5 years. My mother lived for 3 years. Mom's decline never hit a plateau. The disease's progression was gradual and relentless. Her arms went first, which seemed particularly cruel since she was a pianist. When she could no longer climb stairs, she and my father moved to be near me and my children. She began to need help with everything: eating, using the bathroom, controlling her wheelchair, and breathing. During Mom's last weeks, especially after she asked us to stop feeding her, when we took turns sitting with her around the clock so that she would not die alone, I realized 2 things. She was going to die soon, and I believed that I would see her again. This had nothing to do with being afraid of losing her. I was losing her. We had known for 3 years with reasonable and devastating certainty the precise manner in which we were going to lose her. But I also believed with a conviction that I had never before felt that she would not cease to exist upon her death. She was going to join her parents, and one day I would see them all again. Before facing my mother's death, I never really knew that I believed that life continues. I still don't expect others to believe it, but I know it as I know the sun will come up in the morning, as I know I'll get wet with rain, as I know I love my own children. It isn't about fear. It's a gift and a mystery, this conviction that we come from love and we return to love. All right, so and besides what Yancey says, right, that's a powerful story. Thank you for sharing it. It is a really powerful story. So I invite your reactions to it. Naomi?
Okay, I think in my mind, when I read this, it brought up the question of when does life end? Because there was a family option here. And it's the kind of option that would exist if she had been put into an ambulance and brought to a hospital. She would have been intubated. She would have been fed through a feeding tube. So one of the questions that this raised in my mind is, what kind of decisions are there to be made about life and when life ends? What does living mean? uh, all right, she asked people to stop feeding her. And it's a common choice made by elderly people. But I guess again, my question is, what it raised in my mind was, when does life end?
Yeah.
And what control do we or should we have over that?
Right. Right. It's a very important question, right? And there is a kind of stereotype, which is, unfortunately sometimes borne out in actual stories, right, where there are families who are uh, so horrified by the thought of a parent's death that they will not let the person die, right? They do what Naomi suggested, right? To put them on feeding tubes, to put them on ventilators, and to sort of keep them going in a kind of a half life. Um, so clearly, this family didn't make that decision, right? This family uh, made what you know made the appropriate choice for their mother, right? But I guess your question might be, Naomi, right? It was, is there was that decision made easier by their theology, or not? And it is an interesting question. Go ahead, Mary. You have to unmute yourself.
Oh, and how does,
Yep.
okay, I'm okay now, okay. I really responded to this part of the article because I took care of my father for 6 years, and at times it was very challenging and profoundly sad. Other times it was funny and it was very rewarding. And I had the same feeling that she has here once he passed, that he would be in my life just in a different way, a spirit that was still very much with me. I would not be without him completely. And I have the same very strong feeling that I will end up with him. And I don't believe this is because I am afraid of death and I'm making excuses for death. It's a very strong instinctual feeling. And I also want to say thank you so much for bringing this wonderful article to our attention, because I think she's a beautiful thinker and she expresses herself so well, and she's not trying to tell us what to think. She has a strong relationship with what she believes. So there's a strength, but there's also a tenderness in her that I find really wonderful. And she listens to other people's point of view, like Hawkins, and saying, well, actually, that's a pretty logical way to look at things. So I just really appreciate her way of expressing what she believes to us.
Well, thank you, Mary, for putting that out there, because I agree. I think I find her. The reason I brought this article is because I found her so appealing. Whereas there was one that George Yancey did with a Jewish leader, and it wasn't bad, but it didn't draw me in the way that this woman's conversation did. So yeah, thank you for stating that, and thank you also for sharing your story of your father and your relationship with him, because that is right. That's another it's another twist on this type of a belief, right? That heaven or not, right? Whether is sort of that the real thing is that the person hasn't left entirely, right? There's still a presence in your life of your father. He hasn't gone away from you completely, which is a beautiful way of stating it. Go ahead, Richard.
My experience is somewhat similar to Mary's. I was a primary caregiver for my mother, and it was trying, but thank God we had an aide living with us. That saved everything. But I had been away from home for many years, and this time that I spent with her at the end, years, of course, it was very fulfilling, and I'm glad that I did it. We were with her, the whole family was with her when she died. First of all, she went into hospital by her own choice, DNR, the whole thing, morphine and oxygen to keep her going. At the end, it was very sad, but we were all there. But one of the things that made us feel comfortable, even though none of us is particularly a believer, she died while watching the Mass on TV. Now, supposedly, your hearing is the last thing to go. So we'd like to think that the last thing she heard was a priest.
Thank you. Go ahead, Barbara Goldwasser. Barbara, we can't hear you. There you go.
Okay. Yes. Hello. I was taken by Hawking. Obviously, he referred to his area of expertise. He was a scientist, computer, and what you see, what you know, is what you build upon. But you can conject. So I don't know. And it was interesting for him to say, well, it's like a computer, it's broken down, and when it's broken down, it doesn't work, and that's it. And that's a poor paraphrase. I can't even say it right, paraphrasing him poorly, but that was his opinion.
Yeah.
And as such, it should be taken so, but his name has weight.
Right. And I think that's often what happens, right? Is that that someone with a name like Stephen Hawking, right, with that level of visibility and the respect that he earned over the course of his life, right? He says something like this, and people say, well, and he's a scientist, so he's probably got it right, right? Whereas, which does lead, I think, in certain circles, right, to sort of a disenfranchisement of people who know something else to be the case, right? So because there is a way in which, and this is there's a phrase or a word. There's a word for this called scientism, right? That because the scientist says it, it must be true and universally true because that's how science works, right? And so but this is about there's many things that science can tell us, right? About the afterlife, science knows just about as much as any other thing. Basically, no one really knows, right? In any kind of a concrete way, what happens, right? So we turn from science to other realms for that. Go ahead, Naomi.
I guess this is more from Eastern tradition, but I've seen books about it by Westerners, that you do not immediately ascend to heaven. You keep coming back in different forms with the same people in different forms until you all get it right.
Mm.
And in a way, maybe that means you ascend to nirvana, but
Yeah.
I've seen several things along this theme in the last 20 years. I'm not sure about before then.
Right. That does sound like a Buddhist kind of a thing. All right, so we'll continue. So Yancey says, that is a powerful story, and I thank you for sharing it. How do we explain the fact that even Christians continue to fear death, despite the fact that they believe that there is so much more after we die? Well, Christians hope to go to heaven, but ultimately it's not up to us. Perhaps the outcome of the last judgment will not be in our favor, or a loved one won't make it. That's a pretty terrifying scenario. Then again, some of us probably imagine that heaven will be boring because we will no longer be doing any of the exciting stuff that we had feared might land us in hell. Change is scary, and death is a big change. Many ways of dying involve pain. Even if we expect a good death and something better beyond, this life is familiar and beloved, and we are in no hurry to go. We also fear for the loved ones we leave behind. Who will take care of them when we're gone? Okay, so I love her second paragraph quite a bit, well, that's all I'll say. So go ahead, Barbara. Goldwasser.
Yes, I did. I was thinking when I was listening to Naomi. Yes, I don't remember the name of the religion that said this, but if you come back in a different form, I guess it depends on what you are, and you don't want to come back in terms of a worm.
Right. Yeah.
There is that. I don't. What religion is that?
I think that's Buddhism, right? Or some
Buddhism?
variant of Buddhism, right? Is that right, or is it Hinduism? I don't remember.
It was one of the two.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a worm. Whatever, a lesser.
Whatever religion I am, I don't want to be a worm.
Yeah, I think both Hindus and Buddhists have the same kind of idea with that. I'm not sure.
Well, at least I was in the same part of the world.
Right. I mean, it is, but it is. I mean, her first piece, right, is interesting, right? That it's is that one of the mysteries, right, of Christianity is that you don't know if you're going to end up in heaven or in hell, right? Which it's a lot of pressure. So I guess you'd rather just not die and find out. But I also find it interesting, right, that this is one of the things that it always strikes me about the afterlife, right, is that it's likely not to be very interesting. But maybe I just don't, obviously I haven't been there, so I don't. All right. But I do think, right, that the change and transition, right, are always terrifying times. And so it's important to recognize it as such. And I think also, right, is that we're very often not ready for a big change or a big transition until we are, right? And so it does happen, as with her mother, right, that there is a time at which a person accepts, right, that death is nigh, and that struggling against it no longer makes any sense. It has occurred to me at times that the atheist belief expressed by Hawking, that there is no afterlife, that there is nothing after we die, might have an upside of adding value to our current lives. We've heard that thought expressed today. For example, I might treat people differently knowing that I will never see them after this life. Given that, do you think that believing that one will exist forever could negatively impact how one lives in the present? Thiel says, I suppose there are Christians who use their hope of heaven as an excuse to be lazy or immoral, though I don't know very many of them. More common and more problematic is our tendency to look down on people who don't believe what we do. Yet believing that life ends at death can also lead to nihilism or to treating people horribly. Neither belief guarantees a good character. When it comes down to it, right, it doesn't really matter whether you believe in the afterlife or not. She's arguing that's not necessarily going to have any determinative influence on your character. Go ahead, Barbara Goldwasser. You're muted, though. Barbara, you're muted. There you go.
Now?
Yep.
Okay. I was married to a philosopher for 17 years, a philosophy professor. And that was interesting in the beginning. We finally called a truce because it was good that he believed in, but it was fine for me to do what I felt was appropriate. And then of course we would have a discussion and go on. I was not his pupil, although I did read what he had and did learn. But then again, it's interesting how one person can influence another when they meet. Done.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's see here. So do you think that people lose anything by taking an atheist stance? And if they don't, why should they invest in the belief that we exist beyond the grave? I'm not terribly interested in convincing others to believe what I do about life after death. I may turn out to be wrong. And anyway, whatever is going to happen will happen, whether or not anyone believes in it. I'm much more interested in working to make our world more just. If only every religious person felt that way. And actually, and every atheist felt that way also, rather than trying to convince each other they're wrong. In this life we have right now, people are suffering. This is not new. In his Orbi, I don't know how to pronounce Latin, I apologize, blessing in March, Pope Francis, praying with the world from a dark and empty St. Peter's Square, suggested that perhaps we can learn from the pandemic what we have failed to learn from war, injustice, poverty, and environmental catastrophe, that we need each other. If God is love, then we must do everything we can to reduce one another's suffering now and always. In fact, Jesus says that God cares far more about whether we do that and about whether we invoke God as our reason for doing it. So if believing in life after death motivates you, great. If not, then let's find another reason. Pick a cause and get to work. All right. So there's a famous line in the Talmud that has God say, whether you believe in me or not, do the mitzvahs, right? Which is to say, live according to the principles of Judaism, even if you don't believe in the supernatural aspect of stuff. So this, and she's basically saying that Jesus said the same thing, which I don't know, but I don't know where he says that, but it would be interesting to find out. But very interesting, right? That again, it's very interesting, I think, to talk about what various people believe. It's less interesting to try to convince people, right, that they should believe one thing or another. Not least of all because it's almost impossible to do that, but also that it's often very rude and doesn't get you very far. All right, so you say that your views on death and the afterlife could turn out to be wrong. If so, if death were in fact final, would it render life meaningless for you? No, I don't believe that life matters because it continues. I believe that life continues because it matters. If it doesn't continue, it still matters. We love each other imperfectly, yet love remains. My mother's love for me did not begin or end with her. She could love me because others loved her. They could love her because they had been loved, and so on. Her love is with me now, and it will continue through me, through everyone I love, through everyone they love, long after we are forgotten. Whether I actually see my mom again in the specific way I anticipate doesn't change that. As love, we live forever. We always will have lived. All right, so we're almost at time. So we got to the end right at the right moment. So I invite you to offer any concluding thoughts, any ideas that have sprung up that didn't necessarily seem like there was the right place to put them, but I'm happy to hear them now. Go ahead, Barbara Baird.
I really like her approach. I happen to agree with it completely. It's live and let live, and you don't try to convert other people to your way of thinking. You do it by example. I guess she's doing it by example. And if people come to agree with her because they admire her and respect her, then that's fine. And if they don't, that's okay too.
Right.
I think that's an excellent approach.
Thank you. Richard, you had your hand up. Did you want to say something? Maybe Richard,
No, I'm all set. No, that's
Okay.
fine. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining me and for discussing this and sharing your perspectives. I really, really appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you. If anyone, if I have anyone who would like to, or there's two things I wanted to mention. I've said I'm going to try to mention them at every time that that I have a program. The first one is that if you don't already know, I make a voice friend every morning, every weekday morning, with a poem, and I have a little blog or a folder in my Google Drive that's accessible to people so that they can see the poems and get some links about them and so on and so forth. If you're interested in that, please let me know and I'll add you to the list. And the second thing is that tonight we're going to have the first of what now looks like it will be 11 sessions of a class on the book of Samuel in the Bible, in the translation by Robert Alter, with a very interesting commentary. And it's a fascinating read, and we'll be looking at it from a whole bunch of different perspectives. So if you're interested in joining us, please do join us tonight. It is this same Zoom connection, and it'll be at 7 o'clock. Tonight is going to be an introductory session, so you will not have missed anything. So please feel free to join us, and I look forward to seeing you all. So bye-bye.
Bye.
I'm
Thank
going to unmute everyone so we can say goodbye to one another.
Bye.
Thank you all for joining us. I'll see you all soon, I hope.
Thank you, Jim.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, Rabbi Jim.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Lynn.
Sure. Bye.
Bye-bye, Gail. Bye-bye, Sylvia. Bye-bye, Barbara.
Bye.
See you soon.
I should have known that. I did. I pressed pound. You're in the meeting. I am? How do I know? You're little tiny. And it's absolute zero silent. Right, because no one's in the meeting yet. Could I be sitting here? Yes. Waiting for the meeting? Yes. Like a zero? Nothing. Right, until 7 o'clock. What time is it? 1:30. So we'll break down steps. How about that? That sound good?